Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions.
Hi, I'm Eric Grant with Sailrite, and today we're on a Pardo speedboat, and we have a cavity here that is meant for flat fenders. But flat fenders don't work very well on the Great Lakes, so we thought it'd be a great idea, because we need storage, to build a zippered bag here made out of a mesh material from Sailrite, and then we can store our gear. We have one on the port side and also the starboard side, and in this tutorial video we're going to show you how to make it.
This zippered bag will be made from a vinyl mesh fabric so it drains quickly. The bag will be fastened to the solid surface using snaps. This type of bag is excellent for boats, but it can also be used by a pool to store your gear and much more. The first step in making the bag is measuring the space that it will fit in.
To take measurements for this zippered storage pouch, what we did is we used some blue painter's tape, and then we used a pencil and we marked the corners. You can see it down here for all 4 of the corners. We also measured the depth because we're going to have our bag come out all the way to the edge of this wall here. So what we need to do is we need to get some measurements now that we have the corners marked. So it's important to take a diagonal measurement, and you only really need to take one diagonal measurement, and it's a good idea to get a second helper for this. Right now I don't have a second helper to help me with this, but that would be the first measurement. Then you want to measure up from each corner all the way to the top where you marked it, and you want to measure the top, the bottom, this side, and also the back side. So those are the 5 measurements that you need, plus the depth measurement. It's a good idea to write down the general size of it and then to label each one of the measurements. This is for the starboard side. We were showing the port side, but you get the idea. Write all this stuff down so you know exactly how you measured.
Now that we have the measurements, it's time to mark and cut the back plate.
This is our starboard panel, and this is the front side, and here are our measurements with the diagonal. And then here is our port side, and here is the front side because they're obviously flipped. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure this line first at the bottom at 57.25. Then we're going to find the diagonal by making an arch. So let's show you how to do that. This is the running length of the fabric, and this is the width going this direction. This is actually 69 inches. So if you look at the panel, I can place one here, and then on the fabric I can place the other one alongside it. So this will be our running length. So 57.25. Now I don't like measuring all the way to the edge when I'm doing rectangles that aren't perfect rectangles. I actually like to be a couple inches from the edge in case I have to tilt the edge a little bit. And so I mark it with a scribe ball. So notice I'm a couple inches here and a couple inches here, and I'll just put an X right here, and then we'll go down here, and 57.25. I'll put a little X right there, and now to find the diagonal. So here's my mark. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this flexible tape measure and put it on that mark, and use an awl here, and just do this on a sacrificial table. Then I come across here. My diagonal is 61.75, which means it's right here. And what I'll do is I'll just lightly do an arch because I don't have any idea where this is going to fall. And then let's do it down here too, which should be about the right spot. Okay, so there we go. So now we're going to find the height of this one side, which is 25.25. So I put it on my mark down here at 25.25, and wherever it intersects with that arch, which is right there, that is my side that I'll draw a line straight from there. So now I'm going to use the tape that I used for the diagonal and put it up at 26 7/8. So I'm going to put it up here so I can roughly guess where that is. And I need to use a second measuring device and measure from where we marked the arch And that one needs to be 57 1/4, same as the bottom. So I'm going to put this on that mark, and let's move this over so I can see it. 57 1/4. So I just move this over, and I find where they intersect. 26 7/8, which is right about there. 57 1/4. And I need to make sure I'm on that mark over there. And I'm at the top side of the ruler. So I'm using the top of the ruler here. 57 1/4, 27. So it's right there. So where these intersect, 26 7/8. Bang. There's my mark. So now we should have it perfect. So now I'm going to take the awl out, and I'm just going to strike a line from point to point that we had, and then we're going to confirm our measurements. These are our cut lines. I know that this is exactly the size of the panel that we measured, and we're going to take up seam allowance, but we want it to be a little bit small. That's why we're not adding seam allowance to this. We're actually making it the exact size that we measured. So we're going to come up to this arch, put a line here, and over here. So you get the gist of this. Now before you should cut, you should always confirm your measurements are accurate with each side, and that's what I'm doing here. Okay, so I've confirmed all those. Now, before we go any further, we want to label this. This is the top, so I'm going to put T here. This is the bottom, B. This is the rear, so I'm going to put R, and this is the front. Okay. So we just made this panel and we labeled it, and we're not going to put a zipper in this. We're going to include this as the back panel of our pocket. So this is exactly the size that we want. For the second panel, it'll be the front, and it'll have a zipper in it. So we need to add to the height of it. So we're going to use this panel to make our second one, and we're going to add some height to that for the allowance of the zipper. Since this is our back panel, I'm also going to do one thing with my scribe ball. I'm going to mark IN. This is the inside of the back panel. You can mark it back so you don't get confused, and inside. So now, Stamoid, Pfeiffertex, Textiline can all be cut with scissors. No reason to use a hot knife. So we're going to cut right on top of that line, all around. I love 303 multi-surface cleaner. I actually use it to clean spots on the carpet, but watch what it does to get the marks off. It's incredible stuff. If you don't buy it for this project, buy it for your carpets.
Let's move on to marking and cutting the front plate now.
Okay, so we moved our fabric over, and we just moved this up over here, and we're going to use this as a pattern again. There's no right side or wrong side to this fabric, and that's the case for most mesh fabrics like this, vinyl mesh fabrics. So I'm going to lay it really right along this bottom edge, and then I can just mark around the perimeter, and we'll cut it out. Now we need to add up here for the zipper, because this is going to be, this one under here is going to be the one with the zipper. We're using a number 10 molded tooth zipper. This is from the brand Lenzip, which we carry. And we want the gap to be fairly large so the slider moves easily. So I'm going to mark it here and here, which is basically 3/4 of an inch. As you can see, zipper will be exposed. On the edges, the fabric's going to come over, and we're going to have a 1/2 inch single hem here, and a 1/2 inch single hem here. So that's 1 inch that we're going to steal for the hem, but yet we're going to have 3/4 of an inch exposed. So that means that we need to add only a 1/4 inch, because the difference from 1 inch and 3/4 is a 1/4 inch. So that's what we're going to add. So I'm using the clear acrylic ruler because I can see through it, and I'm just going to place it on at a 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to strike my line all the way across the top. Okay, before you move this panel, transfer your rear, top, bottom, and front here. This is the one with the zipper, so we're going to set this one aside. This is an outside surface. So I'm going to mark at the top because I don't really want this on the outside. And this is the zipper panel. So where are we going to put that zipper? Shoot, I can't remember. Before we cut out this front panel, we're going to mark a line for the zipper. And I'm going to come down 5 inches. There's no rule for this, but that's where I want the zipper to be installed. And obviously the seam allowance is going to make it so it's less than 5 inches. But right now I'm marking straight across, parallel to the top edge, 5 inches down all the way across, and we'll slit it there for a zipper. I'm going to put a T down here about a 1/2 inch from that edge and just mark outside here. Let's cut this out. This is the front panel with the zipper that's going to go in here. I'm going to take a roll of masking tape. This isn't a full roll, but you can make whatever corner you want. I like to make rounded corners. So I'm actually just going to use this to round all the corners. Now obviously we don't want to round where the zipper is. We want to round above the zipper here. So don't get confused by that with your front panel. And we're going to do the same thing to the back plate. So we're just going to cut all 4 corners on both the front and the back panel, just like that.
Our 2 plates are cut. Now we're going to add a zipper to the front plate.
This is the front panel. This is where the zipper goes. I'm going to flip this over so you don't get confused, because I like to work obviously with the edge that we're going to be working with. So now this is the top and that's the bottom. We're going to do a hem here, and that hem needs to be on the back side. So this is the top edge. I'm going to flip this over here so we can scribe a line here and fold up to that line. Since we're doing a half inch single hem, I'm going to mark it at 1 inch all along the length with my clear acrylic ruler and my scribe ball pencil. This is a 1/4 inch seam stick for canvas and upholstery. I like it because it's really thin. This seam stick sticks like gangbusters to most of these vinyl meshes, no matter the brand. Again, we're using Solstice 86. We're putting it about a 1/16 inch from the raw edge of the fabric. You don't have to use it, but boy, it sure makes sewing easy. Peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue. This is an acrylic glue, not a rubber-based glue, so it doesn't yellow. So make sure you get your seam stick from sale right. We try to think of everything. So we're going to fold this up to the line, which creates our 1/2 inch single hem, and we can be fairly accurate because we struck a line. So this would go down like this. Our T and T is in line. We're going to move this one aside. We're going to take this one. This has to have the zipper on it. I'm just going to flip it upside down because that's where we need to scribe our line. We're going to scribe our line here, put double-sided tape on it, fold it a 1/2 inch, just like we did before. Okay, we have our zipper here, and this is the edge we just hemmed. We're going to put double-sided tape down so that we can stick our zipper in. Now we want this really close to this edge. Well, not sticking over the edge, but we want to be fairly accurate with this and keep it about a 1/16 inch away from the fold. That keeps it away from the edge of the fabric and should stay within the flange of our zipper. So here's our mark that we marked on the zipper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that mark over this fold here, and I'm going to mark the fabric here. Now I'm not going to strike a line on there, but that's where we want the zipper basted. So we're going to peel off the transfer paper, and I'm going to leave a little bit of the zipper, about 1 inch or so, exposed. And I'm just going to use that single hem edge and try to baste it down consistently along the entire length like that. So no reason to mark it, in my opinion. So we're going to do this all the way down, and then what you should get, if you turn this over, this is the correct side, you'll get a distance that far from the zipper, which will make our slider move beautifully. So here's our top panel, and I've already put the basting tape on. We didn't show that. I'm going to just peel off a little bit. These edges have to be in line. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to baste our zipper, making sure that this is in line with each other at that same distance. Yeah, that looks perfect right there. And we're going to carefully baste this down like we did previously, all the way down its length. Okay, this is the wrong side, and that's the right side. Now we have our outside mark here, so I'm going to use my 303 and get that off. All right, I've got my number 20 needle in, my V92 polyester thread, and I think I'm going to leave the needle in center position with the Ultrafeed LSZ. So it'll put the stitch right about there, which should be about perfect. Yeah, I think that's going to be good. And we'll just use this foot as our guide. I'll do a little bit of reversing here. Make sure you check on stitch tension. I already did that, and I'm sewing a 6mm straight stitch. So we're going to sew down this side, and then we'll sew down the other side. I'm going to check my tension. Oh yeah, that looks really good. Now, since the needle's in the center position, I just moved to the other side of the presser foot, and that should put the stitch in exactly the same spot as it was on the right side. Same process. We're going to put 2 sliders on these molded teeth, number 10, Lenzip brand, and one of them is going to go this way with the fat side going in, and then we'll start the other one in the same process on the other end, so they zip together in the center. You just open up your zipper like I showed and force it on hopefully evenly, like that. Oops, okay, it's not even. I can tell there's more zipper on that side. So I need to do it again until it goes fairly flat. So let's just do it one more time here. Hopefully I'll get it. Yeah. Let's try that. Oh yeah, that's perfect, just like that. So we're gonna move this. It's a little bit hard to zip because it's not intended to be zipped against something that's closed. We're gonna zip that here, and then we're gonna do the same thing on the other end. So now they can open up like this, and they can close together like that. So I've cut some 2-inch strip out of some scrap here, and we're going to make some pullers at the ends because it just makes it easier to close the bag. So I'm going to put double-sided tape. I'm basically making a binding on both long edges, and it doesn't matter the length of this because we're not going to use all of it. Just I made it probably 7 inches or 8 inches, I don't know. We're going to peel off the transfer paper, and then I'm going to fold this back. There's no need to measure this. I'm folding it back to about a 1/2 inch or so, and then I'll fold this one back to about a 1/2 inch or so, like that. As long as it looks fairly rectangular-ish, that's good. And then this is going to be sewn in here like that to create a pole. So how long do I want it? I'm going to take up a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so you don't need anything too big, so it'll be right about there. That's about perfect right there. So let's measure that and see what it is. It is about 2 inches. So that'd be 4 inches overall because it's folded in half. So we're going to put that in there, and we'll do one on the other end as well in the same manner. So I folded it in half, and we're going to put it on this. Now we got to be careful when we're sewing over these teeth. And this is just a tacking stitch because we're going to sew through this as well when we sew the boxing on. So I'm just trying to make it as straight as possible. And I'm going to sew back. The 1/2 inch would be about here. So I'm basically a 1/4 inch from the edge. So this stitch will never show up. And I might just do some reversing here and then skip over the teeth so I don't have to worry about my needle hitting them, and do some tacking here. That's all I need to do, and I'm going to do the same thing to the other side.
We highly recommend adding piping to the front plate. It helps to stiffen the bag.
On the front panel, we're going to have piping that goes all the way around, and that helps to stiffen the bag a little bit. So I'm going to find the center. Doesn't have to be exact, but I like to be close to the center. So there I mark the center. So here's my prefabricated piping. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start it about 2 inches past the middle position, and we will sew around like this. So I'm using a seam ripper here, and I'm trying to separate the 2 halves, and they're glued together pretty stinking good. There we go. once I get it open, I want to take my fingers and kind of pry it apart to separate the bond. So now it's coming apart slowly. And I'm going to take apart, probably, hopefully not damaging the flange, about an inch or so of it. So there we go. And we could go a little bit further too, but that's probably sufficient. We're going to put our needle in the right position to get it further away from the cording, because this is just a tacking stitch to hold the cording in place. The final stitch will be put in when we put the boxing in place. Here's our middle position. I'm going to start sewing about an inch away from the middle position with about 2 inches past the middle position. That way I have enough to join the 2 ends together. This doesn't have to be totally precise, so don't worry if it's off a little bit as far as where you start. We're going to put the foot down. There's a tunnel built into the LSZ and the LS sewing machine, so you don't have to change the foot. And let's just sew this on around the perimeter, tacking it in place, keeping the edge lined up with the edge of the fabric, which gives you about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It might be a little bit less, but it's close. I'll show you what we do when we get to the corners. Okay, we're almost to a corner here. And again, we're not trying to sew close to that piping yet, because we don't want this stitch to show up. All I do is just round, because remember I made the corners kind of rounded, so just do this. And then you can sew a little bit slower. I like to sometimes bury my needle with it coming up slightly by rolling the balance wheel by hand, and then I can make a sharper turn with the needle buried if I need to. That is coming out nice. If you get close to your piping, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal, because it's basically going to be in the same spot as our initial stitch when you're done. We're going to sew all the way around the perimeter, and we'll show you what we do when we get to the part where we need to join them up together. Okay, we're coming up to the zipper. I probably should have said, hey, we're going to show you that, because there's a lot of bulk here at the zipper. So you got to be careful that you don't get a deflected needle, especially with that extra pull that we put on. So here I am coming to the needle. I'm going to grab the balance wheel and roll it by hand. I didn't get any kind of serious bang. If I did, I would have lifted my foot and repositioned the needle. Looks like we're going to go over this perfectly easily. So that wasn't too hard, was it? Okay, we are coming up to the middle. I'm going to bury my needle, and we're going to just tuck this in. It'll be a little bit off center because there's my center, but nobody's going to know. So I opened up this much of it, which means that I'll cut this off straight across. You want to try to do it straight, right where you basically opened it up. So bam, like that. Okay, so now we're going to cut off the excess cording at that same locale, hopefully so it's butted up to each other. I'll go a little bit on the shy side first to make sure that, that I don't cut too much of it off. But I want it to butt up to each other and be a teeny bit snug, because I don't want it to sneak back, because it sometimes does. That should do it right there. Yeah, it's right up to it and a little bit tight, which is good. So we're going to take this and we're going to cover this up. I'm going to try to keep my hands out of the way. Maybe I'm going to use a screwdriver so that the cameraman can see this, or you can see this. And that would look pretty good just like that. So sometimes what I do is I use a hard object like this just to make sure that it stays. And we'll just sew right over that. Until we run into the past stitches. No reason to do reversing because we're just tacking everything down, and that makes a nice transition.
It's time to cut our boxing. We're going to be making a continuous boxing, though that doesn't mean that strips aren't sewn together to save on fabric.
Okay, we're going to use the same principle for the boxing that we do for standard box cushions. The thickness I'm going for is about 4 inches, but I really want it smaller than that so that it doesn't stick out. So since our thickness is 4, inches, we're going to just add a 1/2 inch to it. So this is, if you measure it, this is 4.5 inches. And we're going to do a continuous boxing strip. So I'm going to make multiples of these, enough to go around the entire cushion. Obviously, we're going to extend the length of them. And when they're done, or after we're done sewing, it'll be 3.5 inches, which should fit nicely into our cavity and not stick out at all. So we're going to do strip here, and maybe even a strip here. I'm not sure we'll need this one, but we're going to do 3 strips. Okay, these are the boxing strips, and these are continuous boxings. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put them face to face. There's no right side or wrong side yet until we sew it. And we're going to sew a 1/2 inch here, and then we'll join up this one with the end of it and sew a 1/2 inch on it. So let's show you how that's done. So we're just matching up the edges, and I'm going to put the magnetic guide down at a 1/2 inch on the needle plate, right there. And we're going to put the needle in the center position. And I do like to do a little bit of reversing at the beginning and the end. I don't want these to come apart. Right there. And then we'll take this other end, take that out a little bit. I'm not even going to cut the threads, but we do need to make sure that we know this is the outside surface of this one. So that means this has to go up against the outside surface, because now it is an outside surface. And we'll sew this one on. So this should give us extra long length. Same manner. Okay, we're going to move the magnetic guide, and we're going to do a top stitch, just because this will just stick up, because these seams fall anywhere in the cushion. It doesn't really matter. I'm sorry, this isn't a cushion, even though it looks like a cushion. It's a bag. So I'm just going to make sure the seam allowance is over to one side, and we're going to sew through it to do a semi-flat filled seam, which will keep that seam from sticking up. I'm not even going to do any reversing for this. There we go. We're going to do the same thing with the other one as well. So I've got the 2 seams here for the boxing, and I'm just going to find the center of the boxing, which is right here, and I'm going to mark it so I know where that is. And we have the front plate here. We're going to fold it in half and mark the center so the seams fall basically on the same sides of each other. Is this crucial? No, not really. It wouldn't. Oh yeah, if your scribble ever doesn't mark, watch this.
I'm not sure that's good for you. You may want to use a sponge and water. Up next, we're going to add a stiffener to the boxing to help stiffen the bag.
So the boxing is wrong side facing up. The seam allowance is up. And you can see that I have it centered with my front plate here with the 2 marks. I want my a Dacron, 8-ounce Dacron strip to be put up here to stiffen the top edge and also the sides, but none on the bottom of the boxing. But I don't want my Dacron to go into the corner, because it just makes it more difficult for sewing. So I'm going to stop the Dacron right before I get to that corner. So basically there. So I'm going to put a scribe ball here, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. So right there, I'm going to stop the Dacron right about there. That should give me the opportunity to put a fastener. Maybe I want to go a little bit more than that, like that. So I put a fastener in here, right over here, into the Dacron, and still reinforce it, but not have the Dacron impede with going around the corner. So at the corner, I'm going to leave, so I'm going to come down, put Dacron down here too. We know that this is going to wrap around, so I'm going to just say 2 inches or so. And then we'll start the Dacron here, and that 2 inches will come down here. So if we do that, then we want the Dacron to stop here so we can go around this corner. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. This is a 4-inch, 8-ounce Dacron, which we're going to use as a stiffener, but I don't want it to go into my seam allowance. So I'm going to cut it to 3.5 inches. And one way to do that is to use this tool. So you release this thumb screw, and you can set it, see it has measurements on it, at a 1/2 inch, because that's the amount we're cutting off. And I lock the thumb screw down nice. This is, just so you know, this tool is called the Serrate Leather Strap Cutter, but it works for more than just leather. So now I know I'm going to cut off a 1/2 inch, and I like to take scissors and actually cut a slit where I'm going to be doing this, and then feed it in. So you can tell, you can look at the blade and you can see that one end is sharper, and it also has this little notches put on there. That's the end that you feed it into. Go like this. Okay. Now, what we do, so what you do is you just pull on your fabric and you keep it up against the edge. There we go, finally up against the edge. And it is a little bit easier to get a second person to help with this, or you can use a clamp and clamp it down, which I might just do. So I'm just going to use a clamp and clamp it to my table. Doesn't have to be totally tight, just tight enough that it doesn't move. And watch this. So I'm just going to keep my hands like this. This makes for a really nice slitting machine. I mean, you can do this with scissors if you don't want to buy this, obviously. Isn't that cool? Now I have a 3.5 inch tape. I'm going to put the 1/4 inch seam stick for canvas and upholstery down both long edges, this edge and this edge, about a 1/16 inch or so away from the edge. This will mean that we can baste it in before we sew it. Okay, I'm going to take off some of the double-sided tape. This is going to stick like gangbusters. So there's our mark to our corner, and we want to try to center this so that we don't have to sew it into it twice or into the seam, which in my opinion is better because it just reduces the bulk for the seam. So we're going to center this all the way down to our other mark and cut it there, and then we're also going to put it over here. Make sure you do it on the back side of the boxing where the seam allowance is. So we're going to do it to here to the other mark. We'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the right side of the inside foot, and I'm going to sew that down both sides of this. And I will do a little bit of reversing here. So we're probably, what is that, an 1/8 inch from the edge of the dacron. And just do it like that. Now when I get to this end here, I'm going to do some reversing. Then I'm just going to lift my foot and go to the next strip and repeat the process. And we'll do the same thing to the other side over here as well.
In this chapter, we're going to sew that boxing to the front plate.
Now you can see here we got a skip stitch mainly because of this bump here. Not a big deal, that was a tacking stitch, but I'm going to go ahead and cut the zippers close to the edge with a scrap pair of scissors. I don't like to use my good scissors for that. I'm going to put seam stick basting tape on the flange of our piping, keeping it as away from the piping as much as possible. You don't want to get close to that because it'll show up. And we're going to go all the way around the perimeter. Is this necessary? No, not necessarily. But you know what? It just makes sewing on the boxing so easy. So I'm going to do it. So now I'm going to peel the transfer paper off, revealing that glue all the way to the corners. And this is the center position and the center position of this. Now outside surfaces have to face each other. So this, where the dacron is the inside. So that means that I got to move this, there's the outside, and put it on like that, match up the edge, and baste it on, just like this. When you get to a corner, we're just matching up the edges. Now I'm going to cut some relief slits in this, because it has to take the turn, and you don't want to go deeper than your seam allowance. Actually, the more you make, the better at the corner. The easier it is to go around the corner. Okay, so I'm going to take this and flip it up on the table so it kind of take off some more double-sided tape. And all I'm going to do is basically pull it so that those things kind of separate a little bit to get it around that corner. And we'll go all the way around it and show you what we do when we get to the other end. Nice. Now the nice thing about basting this in place prior to sewing is that you can find out where the ends are. You could do that same thing with sewing, but this is kind of nice. So we know that this is about the middle, and I'm just going to take one of these and cut them, strike a line that's perpendicular to the edge here at about the middle position for this one. Like that. Let's go ahead and cut that one off. Okay. And then we know we need a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so there's 1/2 gone. So let's just mark it a 1/2 inch. I'm just doing this for you more than anything. So a 1/2 inch from that cut, which is right about there. That's where our stitch is going to be placed. And then obviously we want this to be cut a 1/2 inch past that line, so I can kind of see through it since it's a mesh material. So there's a 1/2 inch past it, and we need to make sure that we're perpendicular to the edge. Where is that line? There it is. Like that. And we'll cut this side off. Like that, and then we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to sew it together, and look at that, it'll just be a perfect matchup. Now the unfortunate thing is you have to rip some of this up to sew it because you need some working space. So I'm actually going to just fold my material back and match these up. Now I'm not going to do a top stitch here. You can if you'd want, but it does make it a little bit more difficult. So because we cut everything nice, all we have to do, you know what, I'm going to put double-sided tape down there so I don't have to hold this. This double-sided tape is such a friend for sewing, and it makes complicated jobs easy. So watch this. So now instead of me having to hold everything in place, outside surfaces are facing each other, and all I have to do is that. Now I sew it at a 1/2 inch, which is right there. And I definitely want to do some reversing needles in center position. And again, I'm chosen not to do a top stitch for this one. If I wanted to, I could, but I'm not going to. Now, I can just base this down just like it was, and notice that it's perfect size. Okay, so with that done, all we have to do is sew around the perimeter, and we do have piping in here, so we're going to sew on top of the piping, and the needle this time is going to be in the needle this time is going to be in the center position. So we'll just start down here at the bottom, put the foot on top of the piping. That way we're really close to the piping as we sew. No reason to do any reversing, we're just going to sew over those stitches. And since everything is basted down, and if it moves, you can just rebaste it again. Like here, it was coming up a little bit because we had to crinkle up the fabric. So all I have to do is that. And we'll sew around the perimeter like this. I am going to show you what we do at one of the corners. Okay, we're coming up to one of the corners. I am going to show you at the zipper too, but because we cut that dacron a little bit short for our stiffener, all we have to do is lay this down. Don't worry about the wrinkles over here as long as this is flat. We can go nice and slow, making sure that we're next to that piping. Turn your assembly. Then we can flatten this out by putting our finger in here, keeping the wrinkles to a minimal. And there we go, we're around the corner. So that's what you do at the corners, and we'll show you what we do when we get to a zipper. This is why we stayed away from the dacron, or we didn't have the dacron go all the way to the edge, because it just cuts down on the bulk. So I can see exactly where my piping is. Now here's the zipper. You can see the zipper is built in here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go slowly here, because we might get a skip stitch if we're not careful, or we might get a deflected needle. When I get to the teeth, which I'm right at right now, I'm going to roll it around by hand. See, I noticed I hit a tooth, made a little popping noise, but it's going through okay. And just keep rolling it. See, I got a little bit of a shredded thread because our needle deflected a little bit. Not uncommon. I might have to rethread it, but hopefully not. As long as a shredded thread doesn't persist as I get past the needle. Now I'm past the needle. Let's see. Let's keep an eye on the thread to make sure we don't have to do anything radical. Yeah, I think we're going to be okay. All right, so now you know how to do it. We're going to go all the way around and sew a couple inches on top of our previous stitches. We'll probably show that when we reach that. I'm going to go ahead and put a Straightedge tag in this, just on the side. You can put it anywhere you want. So I've stopped sewing here, and I'm just going to lift this up. I know you can't see it right now, but you'll get the idea. I'm going to put it in like that. There we go. So that'll be what it looks like, and it's got a logo on both sides. Kind of nice. Shows the world that you did it yourself. So let's put this back in and sew around that perimeter. I ran out of bobbins, so I was like, hey, we should put a tag in this. I'm just going to sew about 1 inch over my previous stitches, inch and a half, somewhere around there. And when we get to the tag, it'll sew it in. Nice. Okay, we're coming up to where we began sewing. And typically I just sew over this few stitches, and I do a little bit of reversing in the flange because we don't need to worry about the stitches going outside the flange. So that is completed, and there's what our beautiful piping looks like. And there's our joint that we had.
We'll be installing some fasteners in the back plate. We're going to reinforce the area for those fasteners.
We're going to be installing snaps along the top boxing. This is the top side. And in the back, this is actually the front, but in the back plate. And we're going to put them right where the zipper opening is to support it, because this is going to fit in the cavity. So what I'll do is I will measure from this edge to where the middle of the zipper is, and it's 4 7/8 inch. So I'm going to go to my back plate, which is here. And since this is my back plate, the inside edge, I'm going to measure 4 7/8 right here. That's the center. Now our tape is cut to 3.5. Half of 3.5 is 1.75. So from that center line, 1.75 is right here, which is 1 3/4. And I'm going to strike a very light line as a reference of where to stick this dacron down. So right here, all the way across. Okay, so we put a double-sided tape on it, just like we've shown earlier, and we're going to put it along this line. This is the inside, as we discussed before, and this is cut to 3.5 inches. It doesn't need to be any bigger than that. We're going to be putting snaps through this, and this will help to keep it up against the solid surface. And we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew a straight stitch down both sides and then trim it so that it's flush with the edges. We're not going to show that since we've already done that.
Next up, we'll be installing the snaps.
So we're going to have a snap here with a socket, and this is going to be attached to the solid surface. So we need to make sure that this is a 40 millimeter SNAD, that it doesn't run into the sides, and it looks like it won't. So I've already marked the material there, and we're going to mark it over here, and I've done that. And then what I want to do is I want to measure from mark to mark, and I get 52.25, and I'm going to put fasteners about every 13 or 12 inches. So I divide that by 4, and that gives me about a 13-inch span to put snaps equally. So if I measure from this mark, and I put a small mark of 13, because I like to check to make sure that it's going to be pretty accurate before I start. 13. Yep, 13. So that's where I'm going to put them. I want to center them exactly in the middle of this. So I'm going to use this. My tape was 3.5, so I need to put it on 1 3/4, which is right there. And I just put it to the edge of the dacron, and I'll put an X there at each one of these spots. So I'm going to use the press and snap tool. I love this tool. There are other tools that install snaps that are less expensive, And you can check them out on our website, and then you can watch videos to see how they work. But we put the button down here in this die, and we put the socket up here. So don't get confused and install your fasteners wrong. This is the inside, and it needs to have the button on it. The socket needs to go on the outside of the boxing, which is out here. So I'm going to position my tool as such. You can see the crosshair. All I need to do is position the barrel over it, and then with this tool it punches a hole and sets the snap with a squeeze of the lever. And to press the lever, bam! And you've got the button on the inside, and you have the socket on the outside, and it doesn't twist. So we'll do that at every one of these locations. So this is our back plate, and I have the top plate done, and I've matched up the edges to it, and I want a fastener here. So directly across from that, I want to put a fastener, which would put it right about there, which should be plenty of space, and we'll measure to make sure that's right. And I'm not going to put a fastener across from every one of these, though it could be done. I want it across from the two end ones, so right here. So we have a fastener here and here for the back plate. We're just going to put one between these two fasteners, right in the middle, and these two fasteners, right in the middle. And I'll measure to make sure that's right. And we want to be in the middle of this tape, and I'll measure that too. Okay, remember the button goes on the Dacron side, so I'm just going to position it over that spot. And we'll put a fastener at each one of these locations.
We'll be sewing this assembly to the back plate to make it a bag.
We're going to take this is the back side of the back plate. We're going to flip it over, and we're going to apply seam stick basting tape, 1/4 inch, all around the entire perimeter, and we're going to pre-baste these assemblies together so we make sure that they fit perfectly. So I'll just start right here and go all the way around. Outside surfaces will face each other, so that means this goes on top, and obviously the snaps are the top of this. And I've already marked the center. I've cut a little notch in this so I know where the center is. I'm going to peel back the transfer paper all the way to where I marked the center. So there's the center there, so we're going to line that up, and hopefully it's going to be pretty accurate. So right there, okay. And then I'm going to work this direction. And nice thing about the double-sided tape is if I don't like it, I can change it. Now this is our corner, so I'm going to go ahead and cut a few little notches in this just like we did on the other side, which will help it to go around that curve. Okay. And then we'll just continue basting. And if I get to the end and I find that it's off, then I can readjust. So we're going to come around here. This is a little bit stubborn, but you can do it. Like that, like that, like that. Works pretty nice. We're coming up to where we began, which is right here, and you can see that there's excess fabric in the bottom plate, about that much. That can be fixed, actually, and the way to do that, because we're using double-sided tape, is you unstick it all the way up to about the halfway point here, and I'll show you how to shrink up one of the panels and stretch the other. Now this is a vinyl, it doesn't stretch much, but there is a way to do it, so I'm going to show you that when I get to the halfway point. Okay, so now we know that the bottom panel has to be shrunk and the boxing has to be stretched. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger here and I'm actually going to create unevenness. And then I'm going to take my other hand and I'm going to actually push it back so that I get loose fabric on the bottom plate and then baste it to that point. And then I'm going to do that again over here, loose fabric, put my finger over here and kind of introduce small little wrinkles in the bottom plate which shrink it up. But the top plate's not being shrunk up at all. So this will shrink it up without being noticeable after it's being sewn. So in doing this, let's see if we've got some shrinkage here. Yeah. Now I still have a pretty bulky wrinkle here. So as you can see, it's much better, but I'm going to peel it up this way a little bit, and we're going to get this worked out so the wrinkles are more evenly distributed, and then we'll show you what it looks like when we're done. So there we go. I just peeled it up to there, and I got a little wrinkle there, a teeny one there, a little bit of wrinkles here, but they're not going to show up at all. So we've distributed it perfectly. We're ready for sewing. If I measure the seam allowance of the piping, because the flange is a little bit smaller, it's a little bit less than a ½ inch. So when I sew this boxing on, I'm going to put my magnetic guide to almost equal that other side. It's not going to make any difference in this. So we're just going to start sewing anywhere, and we're going to make sure our needle's in center position and sew around the perimeter. No reason to do reversing until we reach the beginning point again. And because we didn't put the Dacron all over here, I don't have to sew through the Dacron. It's still rather easy to sew around the perimeter. I'll show you what we do when we get to a corner. So we're almost to a corner here. I'm going to kick that down, kind of fold that down. There'll be some wrinkles out here, but hopefully not much in the area where we're going to stitch. And I'm going to turn this assembly as I sew. That's all there is to it. All right, I think that's enough. I think you get the whole concept. We'll just sew around and show you what it looks like at the end to turn it right side out. Okay, we're ready to open up our zipper and turn the assembly right side out, the job that I dislike, but it's not that bad. Push the corners out, turn the whole thing right side out, and we'll show you what it looks like here in a second. Our bag is now complete. We have a tab here which we can use to pull the sliders. We have a reinforcement at the top boxing edge up here, which will go on with YKK SNADs, and we have a reinforcing at the back here. So the piping gives it a little bit of stiffness as well. We're going to put it on the boat and show you what it looks like.
Using a snap stud typically requires a hole to be drilled so that you can screw the stud to your surface, but we're going to be using adhesive snaps called SNADs that do not require a drilled hole.
This is the front edge, and this is our first fastener on the ceiling or the top, and this is the one on the wall. So what I would like to do when I'm installing YKK SNADs is when I have a lot of fasteners like this, I don't like to put them on the bag and put it up. I actually like to take measurements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from the seam for this wall, and I get 2 inches to the center of the snap. Okay, so I'm going to write that down. Then I measure from the outside edge of the fastener to the next one, and I get 18 7/8 inches to this edge right here. And then we'll do the same thing for the adjacent ones. Now we want to write this down as we measure. So from this outside edge to this outside edge, we get 13 7/8. And for the top here, we'll measure from this corner and to the center of this snap, and then we'll measure from the outside to the outside of this snap, and we'll write those measurements down as the top. So here are my wall measurements, 2 inches, 18 7/8, and so forth. And here are the top measurements, 1 1/4, 12 7/8. So we wrote all those down for the positions of the YKK SNADs. So now what we have is we've made a template here, and the YKK SNAD that we're using is 40 millimeters, so this is equal to the size of the SNAD that we're using. Now the template was made in such a way where you can see I have a top and I have the wall here. If you measure, let's just use this example here, this snap at the top here, and if you put it on the seam allowance up here at the top, you can see that the fastener is centered between that, and it should be that way for all of these if we've done an accurate job of installing the fasteners, which it looks like we have. So this is a great template for that. Now for the wall, what we did is we flipped it this direction, and from that seam, the fastener is centered there. So we can use this to easily locate each one of the snap positions, and we know exactly where the SNAD will be installed. So for the top, the first fastener is 1 1/4 inches away from that corner. So 1 1/4 is right here. I'll mark it here, but I'm also going to mark it right here as well so I can see that mark. And then the next measurement is 12 7/8. So from that mark, 12 7/8 is right here. And we'll keep doing that down the wall. And a pencil obviously works really well on fiberglass, and it cleans up nicely just by rubbing it. For the wall, the first measurement is 2 inches, and I don't know exactly where it's at, but we'll use our template for that. I'm just going to mark 2 inches. Next one over is 18 7/8 from that mark we just made. 18 7/8 right there. And we'll keep going down the wall in that manner. The placement of the fasteners is so important that I'm actually laying on the deck. So here's our mark, and I'm going to transfer that mark to basically the center of this so that I can tell exactly where I'm putting each one of these fasteners. Now we're going to use our template. This is the wall. Okay, so there's our mark. And that, okay, good, I can see the mark. This is our wall. So I'm going to put it up to the top here, and we want to make sure that mark's centered, and then we're going to take our pencil and we're going to go around the hole and mark it. That should be 40 millimeters, and there we go. There's the top for the top fasteners, and there's our mark, and there's our mark there. We can put this over here. Mark is centered, it's up against the wall, and we will mark each location in the same manner. So here's our position, and I'm going to use the template on the side, and then I'm going to use an alcohol prep pad to get the coating off of the fiberglass. It has a special coating on it, and this will wipe it off, and also clean the surface. And we're going to do this to all the locations. Hopefully we still have a circle left that we can see where we need to apply the primer. We're going to do this to all the locations first with the alcohol prep pad. This is 3M Primer 94, and I highly recommend you do this when installing SNADs. Break it by squeezing it, and you can see the liquid goes to the end. And then you can use the template and put it over your spot that you can still see, and you want to go over that spot thoroughly. And we'll let that dry a little bit. Move to the next one and do this. I like to do it twice. So I'll come back to all of them one more time and apply it a second time. We'll do this to all these locations. Now is SNAD time. This is the 40 millimeter domed stud, and on the back side we have the 3M VHB, very high bond adhesive. Remove the backing, trying not to touch any of the glue. We can still see our spot, and it is primed for application. I'm going to try to put the logo so that it's up so you can read it, though that's not important. Now what you want to do is you want to apply some pressure for about a minute. After 72 hours or so, it has got the full strength of the bond. So don't be fastening and unfastening or apply any weight for at least 2 days, and then you'll have the full strength of the glue. Perfect. All of our SNADs are now installed on the wall and also on the top up here. We're ready to fasten the bag. We're going to give it an hour or so just to cure up, and then we'll put the bag on. All right, we're ready to secure our bag to the SNADs. First one, perfect placement. Second one.
These zippered storage bags are great for boats, homes, and RVs. Any place that you have a cavity or a surface that you want to use for storage, you can make a bag in any size following the principles in this video. Coming up next is a materials and tools list that we use to make this zippered storage bag out of vinyl mesh fabric that's available from Straightedge. We used a material called Solstice, Fifertex Plus, or Fifertex Standard, or Textiline, or other brands that may be suitable for your zippered bag as well. The nice thing about Solstice is it's 69 inches wide. If you have any questions about the materials or the tools that we used, be sure to give us a call or email us. We're glad to help. If you like free tutorial videos like this, be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe and click the bell to be notified of new tutorial videos when they become available. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Straightedge, thanks for watching.